Good evening or good morning if you're watching it on a recorded basis. But welcome to another episode of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. This is live on Tuesday the 26th at 6 p.m. And as many of you know, this show is repeated, I think, 9 times throughout the week, so you could be watching it at various times. But if you're live tonight on Tuesday, the 26th at 6 o'clock, please feel free to call in. The call-in number is 640-3091. Last week when we were on the elections, where I was telling people go out and vote if you haven't voted already, because the elections are upon us. So some interesting stuff in the elections, I guess. No surprises when it comes to the who finally are the two final candidates in the mayor's race. I was a little surprised that at the size of the win for Joyce Craig with 5,800 votes or so, and Ted Gatsas with 4,900. So it'll be an interesting 5 weeks, a lot of work to be done. I think somebody who's a supporter of Ted Gatsas said at the end of the election it's Joyce Craig's race to lose. It'll be interesting to see what happens, though, over the coming 5 or 6 weeks. Last time out, when Joyce Craig lost by 64 votes, many of you will remember that during that race it got a little ugly in the weeks running up to the actual election. A lot of misinformation was out there, and in the end, sort of downright lies were told. And I find that, like in a small city like Manchester, I find that very disturbing. You know, why people can't just be honest and state people's positions. I know that the narrative is easy. You know, the narrative is, I guess, in short terms, it would be, you know, that Ted Gatsas, incumbent, you know, a guy who's going to hold the line on taxes and keep taxes low in the city, and somehow Joyce Craig, you know, is the person who is going to be beholden to unions and is going to give them everything that they want and increase taxes, etc. Now, the truth doesn't support that narrative. You know, the last time out, the Teamsters Union supported Ted Gatsas, and, you know, you could argue they got everything they wanted as a result of that. But somehow that doesn't get highlighted. I think we have to be conscious that we live in a city where the majority and the public, you know, newspaper, the Union Leader, which I don't carry any distrust of or whatever, the Union Leader. I've said here many times that the Union Leader is the Union Leader. It's a conservative newspaper and it doesn't pretend to be anything else, and so that's fine. You know, we know exactly what we're going to get from it, and it is what it is. We might, if we lived in another town, we might live in a town where the newspaper had a left-wing lean, and then we'd say that it was left-wing leaning. But it does colour the news that we get. That you know, when stuff gets the stuff that gets covered and how it gets covered and where it gets covered. So I don't see from the Union Leader any indication of them. I won't give them a complete freebie and say I'd never seen it, but, you know, it's not as though they're going to print lies. It's much more subtle than that. I think it's where the stories you choose to cover and where you choose to carry them. You know, a story that you make and how you write a headline. So this week's paper, there was a school board meeting last night, which sadly I missed, but I was told it was someone described it to me as a three-ring circus, and I hate to be derogatory about it, but again, you know, the coverage on it afterwards was, you know, about the cupcake ruling. That's a choice of words that one, you know, you can describe it as that, or you can describe it as something else. So, and then all these faux controversies that we have, and people get very uptight based on these things that in the end don't really matter. You know, it's almost like the who cares thing. When you have the problems that you have in a school district, then why people want to get wrapped up on smaller issues, I just don't know. But just going back to the results of the race, we'll go back to the education thing in a minute. Go back to the results of the race. It's going to be interesting. I just wish that people would be forthright about it. I think it's clear that Joyce Craig is not someone who's going to go and raise taxes. First of all, she's covered by the tax cap passed by the voters, that she has to bring in a budget that is within the tax cap. Now, I do expect her to be, and I'll be holding her feet to the fire on this, because I expect her to be more honest with the people of Manchester and not just hide behind this, oh, there's the tax cap, I can't do anything about it. I expect her, if the tax cap is such that the city doesn't have the resources that it needs or the revenue that it needs in order to be able to do what it needs to do or to keep services, then I expect her to, stand up and get on a microphone and go to the media and say the tax cap requires this, but the city requires something different, and then defend it and be able to defend those votes afterwards and appeal. So I do see there will be a difference there. I think that I have to say that at the outset I was surprised that Mayor Gatsis ran in the first place, because I thought after 4 terms as mayor and many terms as an alderman before that, and having served in Concord, etc., and that he sort of, that it was the and having lost the governor's race, so any future position is sort of foreclosed to him. I thought it was an opportune time for him to step back, and I'm sure there are places in the body politic where a man of his talents could be used. And I don't know what his relationship with Governor Sununu is like, but Governor Sununu has been good at handing out the goodies to his both his opponents and his buddies since he became governor. So it just surprised me that he ran. And then, given the number of things in the city and the challenges we have in the city, and the fact that that Mayor Gatsis hasn't been able to overcome them. I think he gave it the 4 terms. I presume he would claim that he's done his best for those 8 years, and so to be most benevolent, I would say you've done your best, and if that's the best you can do, then thank you very much. And we're going to try and find somebody who will do something better. But we are going to have an interesting 4 or 5 weeks. Over the coming weeks here, starting next Tuesday night, we'll have candidates here each Tuesday night being interviewed, some nights multiple candidates, up to and including, or up to the night of the elections. And again, because it's Tuesday, we're going to find ourselves sitting here at the 6 o'clock hour on the night of the on the night of the actual elections. Once again, please feel free to call in at 640-3091, and I'd be happy to take your calls. Moving on to the other races, I think that the 1 or 2 that stand out in my own ward, I was surprised at the size of the win for Will Stewart at 560 votes or something, and then with Bob O'Sullivan coming in a somewhat distant second. So I guess that's quite a result for Will Stewart in his first outing in politics in the city of Manchester. I think a lot of the races are similar to what they were the last time. We have in Ward 4, I think it is, Leslie Want versus Mark Flanders. Hopefully we'll have both of those on here in the coming weeks. But that's a repeat of the last time, as is over in Ward 8, where we have Erica Connors versus Jamila Hu, who are going to be repeating the same contest as the last time. So those are going to be 2. I'm expecting pretty close calls again, because there wasn't a lot of distance between them in the last time out, and here we are 2 years later. The other thing is, Mr. Hassan, the young man who's 20 years of age, is a student at University of New Hampshire in Manchester, who came in second in Ward 12, second to long-time Alderman Keith Hirschman. I was surprised at his showing that he did as well as he did, and kudos to him for getting out there at such a young age. And I know that others have disparaged the fact that he's a young man, and so, that implying that youth are not ready to take up the mantle of governing. But I don't believe that. I think that this city is in dire need of some new blood and some fresh ideas. And we have the candidates that we have now. I wish some of them had done more soul searching and decided, if they had not spent long enough before us, and that they have given it their best shot, and maybe they should move on. I think especially on the school board, both those who are friends of mine, and there are none who I fall into any other category, friends or people I don't know that well, but most of them I know, and I just don't understand sometimes why they continue to be there for a long period of time, especially given the results of where they are. If you've been a school board member in Manchester over the last number of boards, and the results are as they are, I think it's time for some self-examination here, because the status quo isn't good enough, and changes need to be made, and so we'll see where that goes. Again, I want to talk just briefly about, as I often do, about school. Some school items, and there are a lot of things going on in the schools, and one of them is this coffee and conversation that the superintendent does, and the next one is up on October the 11th and 12th, and that's in a couple of weeks' time. And so at 7:30 in the morning, Dr. Vargas will be at Parker Varney Elementary School, and at 4:30 in the afternoon of the 12th, the following day, he'll be at Southside Middle School. So that's 7:30 on the 11th at Parker Varney, and October 12th is 4:30 at Southside Middle School. And again, it's like the turnout for this election. When you think about the number of voters in the city of Manchester, and we had around 10,000 people come out and vote in the primaries, it's amazing. And likewise, when the superintendent is available for conversation, I think people should take the opportunity to go and speak to him. Let's see, we got a caller here. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
Mr. O'Connell.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well. So Sapienza.
Hi, Phil. How are you doing? Nice to hear from you. What's going on?
Thank you. I'm watching your show, and just want to give you a little insight as to one of the reasons why some of the board members that have been on the board so long might want to stick around.
Okay.
Some of them worked really hard to recruit and obtain the new superintendent, who I know you were with, and you know he's making some changes in the district's moving forward. So,
well,
I say, at least in my ward, Ward 2, the committee woman that represents us, not only was chairman of that committee, but she'd like to be on the board to see it through and assist Dr. Vargas in moving it forward. So.
Yeah, and she did. I did talk to her about that, and she did. I asked her, not because I didn't want her to run. I just asked her. I said, "So Deb, why are you running again?" Because kind of like the other in our ward, the alderman had decided not to run, and that was on the cards, I think, for some time. I think Ron Ludwig had done a good job, in my view, for a long time, and I was I was half thinking that Deb might not run, but she made exactly that point to me. She said, "You know what? I like what's happening under Dr. Vargas, and I really want to stay around to help him implement his scheme or his view." So,
awesome.
yeah.
One other thing that she's kind of, I wouldn't say led the charge, but she's certainly been a force, is for school board members to relinquish their health care benefits,
right,
which are costly at best and as you know, we've had this discussion in private.
Right.
We don't really know the cost, and for good reasons. I mean, we don't want people's medical records being out there. But the fact that it is an expense and we don't know what the expense is, in light of the fact that the newspaper's reporting we don't have math books in Manchester,
Right.
I mean, if you put those each in a bucket and said, what do we need more?
Right.
School board members and their families going to the doctors for treatments, costly prescriptions, costly, we all know, imaging,
Yeah,
whatever. We
right.
know the gamut of healthcare is out of control.
Right. I think Phil, just to be
Or do we need to find that $1 million and buy little Johnny and little Susie in the 4th grade on the west side a hard copy math book they can put in their backpack and really feel like they're part of the show,
Right. No, I understand that. I just, first of all, just on the healthcare thing, just so people understand, because I know you do, but, on the healthcare side, to get the actual numbers is it's troubling. We can't get the actual numbers because what people may not always know is that the city is self-insured. So what we're ever given at the school board meeting is a sort of the equivalent cost of what a monthly policy might be, and then so you're given that number, whatever it might be. But there's a real number behind that, which is the actual amount of money the city spends. Because if they've got a school board member who needs specific services, that ends up being $120,000 worth of value this year. That's actual hard-earned money that the school district is paying for that healthcare coverage. And so this other number is just a notional number.
Not only a member, but a member of their family.
Correct. Even beyond that.
Right. And to that end, I'm all for privacy.
Yes.
But to find out the true cost, they do give a number what the district spends on healthcare, and I'm a teacher, so
Right.
they basically say what they spend. How about a subset? What do they spend on members? And if not in public,
Right.
why not in non-public? So at least they know what the number is.
Right.
And if they can't, then give it a range. Or let's be honest with each other and stop this equivalent of a health insurance policy. Let's just say healthcare is expensive and it's something that we really need.
Right.
And some of the newer members, quite frankly, and some of the newer members who are behind, a quality education are now taking those benefits. And I
Right.
don't feel bad saying that on your show because
Right.
I've spoken privately with them and others.
Yep.
And it always comes down to, yeah, well, but. And there's no yeah, well, but.
Right.
Up and until we have all the things we need for the students that we're supposed to be taking care of.
Right.
And you've done an excellent job of highlighting those things, whether it's class size, technology, space, programming, materials. We could go on and on and take up 5 shows.
Yeah, but the thing is, Phil.
If and until those things are taken care of, everything else out of somebody's mantra, like, well, it attracts a better board, or we're working hard.
Right.
No doubt about it. But
Right.
you're a public servant, and there's
Right.
hundreds, if not thousands, of people in Manchester working on your neighbor, Mike Reed.
Right.
This summer they had he was honored by the Moore Center, and I've known Mike for 40 years,
Right.
and I knew he was a great community member, and I knew he always pitched in and helped out.
Yeah.
When I
Yeah.
ever went to his ceremony and I found out all the things that he did,
Yeah.
I was flabbergasted.
He's an amazing guy.
working twice as hard as any board member, and it's all for nothing.
Right.
Or it's all for free. I shouldn't say for nothing. It's
No,
for all
no.
these good causes.
Good causes, exactly. And he's got, he'd like to be sitting at home at nighttime, with his feet up too, but he's actually out there. And those causes, a lot of them have to do with children and the elderly, etc. And when I came to Manchester first, one of the first people I met was Mike Reed, and he and his family are good friends of ours. And I got to tell you, like, he's not getting any free health care anywhere, so I do understand that.
Right.
But the other thing though is,
Yeah, I don't want to make it personal and bash people because they're nice people.
Yeah.
And I'm not going down that road.
right,
I don't want to make it personal.
right,
But when it comes down to it, if you're a public servant, there's a big difference between being a public servant and a public employee.
right.
Big difference.
No,
And
and
when you're in a district with the diverse needs that we have and the limited resources that we have, and both of those are facts.
right,
We have a long list of needs, and we have a limited number of resources, and there's good reasons for both.
right,
Even the superintendent's words were, yeah, it'd be $1 million for the math book, but we're cognizant of the fact that there's limited resources. Well, guess what? have-nots, those students that are on free or reduced lunch, many of them, more than half,
Right.
those students that are, their one chance in life is to get a good education, that's one group. And then others, too. The whole group, not just subsets of the group, the whole group. They deserve a quality education.
Right. Well,
More so than some of the haves on the board. They have a couple homes, they have defined benefits in retirement, they have an education, they have a career, they have a lot of private businesses, they have advanced degrees. They're all set. They have what they need.
Right. They don't need.
Hey, well, it attracts a better board. Here's my point on that. Take a picture of today's board and take a picture of the board before we had insurance.
Right.
They're very similar.
Right. Right. Yeah. When you put it in.
Let me give you an example, because I've been in Manchester a little bit longer than you.
Yeah.
And I don't say that.
No, I know. Go ahead.
You go to this MSD.
Yep.
One of the streets is Jerry Connor's Way. He represented Ward 8 for years.
Right.
He never got a nickel. They named the street after him. And there are many more like him. And I, for one, am tired of hearing, well, we work hard, so we deserve it. I'm not saying you deserve it or don't deserve it. We can't afford it.
Right. Yeah, you know, and
I don't deserve it any more than Johnny deserves a math book. I know that for a fact.
Right. And I've evolved on this topic because I saw it as unimportant originally. I was sort of, it doesn't amount to a hill of beans. But my thinking has changed on a little bit, because when it's put in stark terms around where's the greater need, right? Is it little Johnny or little Susie who needs a math book, or is it a business owner in Manchester who's 3/4 ways through their work life career, who's got a couple of cars and a nice house and a holiday home someplace else and an investment property, a two-family or something somewhere, when those people are extracting health benefits from the city, and little Johnny's going home and he doesn't have enough food to put on the table, and he doesn't have a math book either because we're too cheap to buy it for him, that makes it very difficult. I have to say this though, I agree, but I also, we have a systematic problem, right? And we know Dr. Vargas has talked about the systematic difficulty, structural budget issue in the city of Manchester. We have a problem in the city of Manchester across multiple things. We have multiple needs, and those needs, I don't agree that with people who say, well, we're doing the best that we can and we have to manage the scarce resources that we have. I don't agree that that's the case, because we simply aren't financing our schools at an adequate level, and that's a provable case. It's clear if you do a comparative analysis, and so it's our choice to do these things. And then when I get annoyed about it is when people are covering that up and they want to talk about the great things that are happening in our schools.
Yeah, that could be another show. But
yeah.
And to your point, I'm not for defunding or limiting funds for school. Let's say this: when you use the word "we," it's important to include the federal government, state government, and quite frankly, it falls on the local government. And our situation is vastly different than other districts that you compare us to. You being the collective, you, not just
you.
And some of the analysis is a little skewed because of size.
Right.
So, we only need one gym and we can service 4,000 kids or 3,000 kids, where the town of Bow or somewhere has 1,200, or Bedford has 2,000, and we have double that. And that, you and I can agree, schools are not funded to the level that you and I would like to see.
Absolutely.
We get that.
Yeah. And that's the
point we can start at.
Yes, and what they require.
Also, and you gotta meet in the middle somewhere. You also got to recognize the fact that there are people in Manchester that are having problems staying in their homes. And it's not just the elderly.
Right.
It's the hourly worker. And that's why I include state and federal. And to that point, Dr. Vargas has done a good job with reaching out and making sure we're getting the support that we're supposed to get from those two entities.
Right.
So kudos to him. And on the healthcare issue, I didn't start with this, but I'll say this. It's my belief that everybody should have health care for free.
Right.
So I'm not bashing anybody for health care. My point is, when you got to pick and choose between kids and adults, I want to pick the kids. I don't want the adults.
Right. Well,
so if we had, I voted for Bernie Sanders, and I get yelled at for supporting Ted Gatsas. Well, guess what? If we had health care for everybody, we might not be having this discussion.
Absolutely.
And if college was free, we'd be all set.
we'd have different set of challenges, but you're right. I mean, we make choices. One of my problems is, is this very idea that, when I talk to, you mentioned Ted, right? Mayor Gatzis. When I talked to Mayor Gatzis 4 and 5 years ago, and we were, losing teachers and downsizing and class sizes were going crazy, and I said to him in his office, I said, we need, as a city, we need to gather the local representatives, our state representatives, representing Manchester. We need to get them in a room up in Concord and tell them that they need to take action in unison to do something about it. And his exact words to me were, "Good luck with that." And so my problem with not just Ted Gatzis, but with, say, Frank Ginta, when Frank was mayor, right? Frank Ginta runs on a ticket to go down to Washington D.C., and part of his ticket is to defund.
Let me for a second.
Yeah.
When you said good luck with that, how'd you make out trying to get everybody in the room?
Not very successfully. We had a lot of individual conversations. We couldn't get,
Okay, let's take a break for another second.
Yeah.
To that point, Teddy will take the bullets because he's elected, and if you're going to lead, you're going to take your shots.
Right.
People are going to come after you. But here's my point. You can talk to him in private, but as soon as you say to him, "All right, let's get together and let's really have a voice," well, I might not get reelected. You don't hear them saying we should have free college or free health care.
Right.
You don't hear them saying, "Yeah, I'll bust the tax cap and buy the math books."
Right.
No, they say, "I'll try and be a little bit better than Ted on the budget so I can compare myself to him and maybe I'll get elected."
Right. Well,
they're not going to lay their life on the line like you do.
No, well,
I don't mind saying it. I'm not. That's why I would never run.
Right. I'm going to be.
And here's my point.
Yeah.
I appreciate somebody that's more upfront and a little less guarded.
Right.
To say, well, we do need to stay in the tax cap, but we also need this.
Right.
Oh yeah. Well, just say what you really feel.
Right. Right.
Are you going to buy the books or not?
Yeah. Well,
all those teachers were getting cut.
Yeah.
And you went after Teddy, and you had every right to. That's fine.
I went after everybody.
There was a lot of members on that board.
Yep.
That voted to allow those teachers to get laid off, and now our own association, the Manchester Education Association, is endorsing them to get reelected.
It's funny.
How much progress have we made?
I hear. Well, I'm just saying. I'm not picky about who I've talked often on this show about the 29 people who are in government in the city of Manchester, and it sits on all their tables. Some maybe not equally, but they are all responsible for it. And just before, on this show tonight, I was talking about people who are going back to rerun again. I think they should have a long, hard look and say, where have we actually gotten to? But I agree with you. I just want people to be direct and call it like it is, and stop, being two-faced about it. Now, I had, like today, I'm not accusing Joe Kelly-Levasseur of being two-faced, but Joe Kelly-Levasseur was on social media today, and he mentioned something about having people, throwing money at the school district, and why we still don't have books, and I had to correct him on it. I've got somebody on another line here, Phil, so I'm going to let you go. Oh, they can? Okay, so hold on one second. Go ahead, caller. Oh, we've lost them, I think. Try again, caller. Come back and we'll get you back on. Are you still there, Phil? Hello? I think we've lost Phil, too. Hi, Phil. Are you still there? Nope. Doesn't sound like it. All right. Sorry we lost you there. We'll just hit that one off. Technologies. See, I need some technology teaching in our schools. Please call back again the caller who was calling in. So Phil makes a good point. The problem with the problem as I see it with the healthcare thing is I think when you put it in stark contrast and strip it all away and you talk about when kids don't have textbooks and school board members are getting healthcare, then maybe it's time that healthcare went away, and I would lean in that direction today and say when we don't have the things we require in our schools, then let's do those things first. I worried about being dragged down rabbit holes to some extent, and by that I mean I take the analogy of, for instance, the when we were when we spent years talking about the surrounding towns, and many present school board members even were adamant that the surrounding towns who were sending their kids to the city of Manchester were taking advantage of the wonderful school system in Manchester, and we were told, and I, called their bluff. They can't get better anyplace else. We'd have a much better school system if we weren't subventing the kids of Bedford or Auburn or Candia or Hooksett. And that became a discussion. You couldn't have a discussion about the realities of what was happening in Manchester because people wanted to take this shiny object over here and say it's all about the surrounding towns. What I find infuriating is too strong a word, but what I find just upsetting is the moving target nature of this stuff. So these people get their win, and clearly from a social point of view, creating greater divides in our community is not a good thing. We were a healthier, greater Manchester community when we had kids from Candia and Auburn and Hooksett and Bedford too, but especially Candia, Auburn and Hooksett, who'd been coming here for hundreds of years, when we had this, bigger island and group of kids who got to, cross mix with each other and learn from each other, etc. It was better for the kids from Hooksett and Candia and Auburn, and it was better for the kids from Manchester. And we did have economies of scale based on that. But none of that, we couldn't get any of these people to agree on that, because in the end, all of them happen to be people who, in the end, want to hold the line with regard to spending. They just don't want to spend any more money. So now we're back to talking about having the least well-funded school system in the state of New Hampshire on a per capita basis. The surrounding towns are gone. That red herring of a conversation is over with, and they still haven't moved off of dime one, because they're never going to move away from the fact that they don't believe in financing our schools adequately. And when we have members of these school boards and of our Borough Mayor and Aldermen who are not convinced that a public education in Manchester is a high priority or the top priority thing. And we have some public representatives who are public in saying that they don't believe that our schools are there to educate people at all, but they're actually there to indoctrinate them, and that they're being run by educrats. That's what they think about the public school system. So it's no surprise at all that kids don't have textbooks and there are 2 kids on 1 seat and classes are overcrowded, etc., because there are people who have votes at the table who hide behind all these nice, these different topics, and they want to spend lots of time talking about, be it cupcakes or let it be anything else, because they don't want to talk about the hard issues. It's much easier to describe some state requirement around healthy foods in the schools and make that the cupcake battle, and be mocking about it and make it sound as though, these bureaucrats are destroying our school system and blah, blah, blah. That's fine. Wherever the truth of all that is, it's a long way away from the fact that there are 32 kids in a class, that we don't have enough of the courses and that we need. And that we're not funding our schools at the level they should be funded. You can avoid all those things. You don't have to talk about kids not having math textbooks. You don't have to talk about the fact that there's nobody managing curriculum on a school-wide basis. You don't have to talk about the fact that we don't have BLILs anymore. You don't have to talk about the fact that despite the fact that we had the largest number of kids per teacher of any school district in the state of New Hampshire, we ended up eliminating 14 jobs this summer. You don't have to talk about that. You don't have to talk about a young girl being raped at West High School and the whole thing being kept secret for 2 years. You don't have to talk about that when you can spend hours and hours and hours on Facebook and other social media talking about, the cupcake thing and parental notice for cupcakes, and it's all because so long as you're talking about that, you're not talking about the hard problem of, are you going to pay for textbooks for the schools or not? And I started to talk when I was talking to Mr. Sapienza a moment ago about the issue with Joe Kelly Levasseur, the Alderman at Large today. And he just made a comment. I can't remember exactly what it was, but something about, it had to do with the school books, the textbooks thing. And but to paraphrase him, because I don't remember the exact term, but he said, we throw money at the school district and we give them a pile of money, and they still don't get the job done. And I had to point out to him in a very short and I hope succinct response to him. I said, because Joe Kelly Levasseur is somebody I talked to, and he's just simply incorrect. I pointed out to him that this current year, that level funding for our schools to retain the programs and positions that we had in place, the cost was $170 million. That's what the cost was. And Mayor Gatzis's budget came in sub $165 million. So we were $5 million short. So we made $5 million worth of cuts in this year's school budget over last year. That's a simple fact. And then we did go back, and kudos to our superintendent, who went back and said, if you give us $2 million more, bringing us to 167, we will do the following things. We critically need to bring foreign languages back to our middle schools. Let's do that. We need health in our middle schools. Let's do that. Our class sizes in elementary schools are too large. Let's bring some people back in there today. I think 6 or 7 teachers were brought back from the ones we were after firing, right? So we brought back some of them to alleviate some of the worst problems in our elementary schools. So the good news is, ladies and gentlemen, as a taxpayer in Manchester, you should know that the school board asked for an additional $2 million over what Mayor Gatzis had offered for critical needs and promised to spend it on those needs. And they provably and categorically and clearly spent the money in the manner in which they had said they would. What Joe Kelly Levasseur is conveniently either not remembering or choosing to omit, he must know, and if he doesn't, I'm telling him, that the real cost of maintaining the programs and the people that we had in the city of Manchester from last year to this year was $170 million. And he voted for a budget that, with the pluses and the minuses taken out and added, was $3 million short of what we needed to keep what we had last year. And what we had last year was already the least amount of money spent per student of any district in the state and the highest number of pupils per teacher in the state. And in response to that, he, as one of the 14 members of the Aldermanic Board and one of the 29 members with the mayor and both boards, he is one of those people voting in this city, saw fit in the light of that to eliminate teachers in the district, to give the school district less money than what it required. And then, frankly, and I don't want to be picking a fight with Joe, but he's a big boy, so he can take it. And then amazingly, we're here in the fourth week of school, and we have an alderman at large on public media cribbing about the fact that, how come the kids don't have school books? We give them all this money, and why don't they? What money did you give them, is my point. You didn't give them the money. Those of you who are paying attention, the city of Manchester gave, for want of a word, I don't know why we do it like this, it's like divide and conquer, but we spent $3 million on school books, some of which didn't all go to school books, but we'll call it the school books money and not argue about where it all went. Let's say it all went to school books. There was $3 million borrowed from the city into the school board side to buy textbooks 6-7 years ago. Maybe 8 years ago, 6 years. Let's call it 6 or 7 years, because I don't have the precise number in front of me. And that $3 million was to be paid back to the city of Manchester at an amount of $450,000 or $430,000 per year over the following 8 years, so that the $3 million would come out up front from the city side into the school side. Talk about city of one, and we're all one city, and we were to pay, and so now the city of Manchester is paying, the school district is paying back the city $430 million per year. But here's the rub. Then there was a requirement that we needed for security upgrades to the schools on the lock system We needed money to put computers into the schools to meet various requirements. And we had a requirement for a new phone system, part of the Department of Homeland Security as well, so that if there was ever an emergency situation, that the phone system would work as needed, so they could contact each room in the school, etc. So we borrowed another, in this case bonded, $3 million to pay for that. And that money is being paid back by the school district at the same rate, that $430,000 a year. And as soon as the $3 million for the security and Homeland Security and phone system, as soon as that $3 million is paid back over a period of 8 years, the payments on the books that haven't been fully completed will be added on to the back end, so the school district will continue to pay that back as well. So we haven't even completed the payments on the $3 million we got 6 years ago for the textbooks that are now 6 years old. So we have no plan. This is the school budget this year. We've decided that we're not going to pay for the cleaning of the outside of the windows of the schools in all our buildings, and we're going to reduce the people working in the evenings in our schools cleaning the schools. That we're going to reduce their hours from whatever it was in the evening by a third in any case, and so that's what we did in this budget. So I don't understand how an alderman, a smart guy, an attorney like Joe Kelly Levasseur, who sees himself, I think, as having commanded his numbers and looking at it, what he doesn't understand. And then why go on social media and ask questions about, we give them all this money, why aren't they buying books? We didn't give them any money for books for decades. We gave them $3 million for books 6 years ago. They're still paying it back out of the small budget that they get, already small in terms of comparison to other surrounding towns, and there is no plan to replace any of those books. And you can go to any one of our schools, any one of them, wherever your kids go, ladies and gentlemen, whether it's from Northwest down to Goss Falls, and from Webster Street all the way down to Green Acres, going to any one of those schools and have a look at the books. And in any given school, if you take out what has been bought by the PTO, PTG or PTAs, you'll find books dating back years. And you go into our high schools, and you have to see the books being used in the high schools that go back to God knows when. I was in a middle school in the week before school opened. I went into one classroom to see one teacher. They have one day at work before the kids come in, and I just happened to be sitting talking to them, and I looked over at the window, and I have the photographs right on here. And on the window were the textbooks that the kids were going to be using for social studies in middle school. And 90% of them didn't have a cover on the back. The back covers were missing off of them because they're all years old. And that's what the kids were coming into on day one of school. And then we have aldermen and school board members talking through their ears about what's happening in our schools and how come they don't do this. It's disingenuous. That's what the problem is. And I've now said to, and I didn't start off to pick an argument with Joe Kelly Levasseur, like I said, because I'm not interested in having arguments with people. But recently I called him out on this, or called him up to tell him that he keeps repeating this thing that if salaries were too low in Manchester schools, that we'd see teachers leaving and moving to other districts. And he keeps saying that. And eventually I called him up publicly and said, we're losing teachers like we did this year. We have teachers leaving our district to go elsewhere because they can get better salaries. An assistant director of one of our programs at the I think it was assistant special ed or assistant student services, left and went down the road to another district and got a $20,000 per year pay increase. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you were earning $80,000 a year as a director of a program, and someone came along and offered you an additional $20,000 to move to, say, Hooksett or Bedford, or to go to Auburn, or to go to Londonderry, would you take the additional $400 a week and leave this behind and take it? $20,000 a year is a lot of money. So, but we have people who are just not honest about the conversation. Let me see who we've got here. Go ahead, caller. You're on line one.
Hi, I'm calling to talk to Jim.
Hi, this is Jim. How are you?
Oh, good. I'm calling to find out. I got some questions about your show.
Go ahead.
Well, I've been watching your show for a while, and I'm just curious as to what basis, where you have a lot of opinions about the school board and a lot of other things, and I'm wondering where you get all this experience from.
Okay, well, first of all, so let's divide out. Thank you for the question. And when you say opinions, I mean, yeah, I have some opinions, but a lot of, the facts that I talk about when I talk about things that I mention often, for instance, the fact that we've got the highest number of pupils per teacher in the state. That's available if you go to the State of New Hampshire Department of Education website, there's lots of information there in PDF or HTML format, and usually they're in like Excel spreadsheets, and so you can go in and sometimes...
No, I don't mean to interrupt you. I guess maybe I'm not asking the question properly.
Okay.
What I'm asking is, you have a lot of opinions on what people should be doing differently. And I'm interested as to what your experience is that you can draw upon to tell them that they can do this differently, that this will work. How do you know that will work?
Okay.
Those are things I'm interested in.
No, I understand. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about myself. I think that's what you're really saying. Where am I coming from? So, first of all, I have 4 kids, right? And they've been in the public school system in Manchester. Currently, I have 2 at Central High School, and I have 2 who graduated Central High School who are at university right now. And then I was, a lot of my experience with regard to what was going on in the Manchester schools and budgets, etc., was I was president of the PTO at Hillside Middle School for 6 years. And
have you ever been an elected official?
No, I have not.
Why not?
Well, I think I could do more from the outside. So I do a lot of, I attend a lot of, because there's a school board and there's a board, mayor, and alderman, and once you're inside, you're. I think then people say that your comments are sort of colored by politics. You know what I mean? They say, oh, he's looking to run for re-election, or he's running for something, or he's a party member of some kind, or whatever it might be. So I do have a good relationship with almost everybody on both the school board and the board, mayor, and alderman, so I'm not like shouting at them from the outside saying, you're a bunch of bad people, because I
understand that, Jim, and I think I watched, I'm kind of new to the whole public access stuff. I just started watching it, but you said that you can affect more from the outside, right?
Right.
What have you affected so far? I'm curious. I've only been watching 2-3 weeks, so I'm kind of understand everything you've done.
All right. So, and I'm also president of a group called Citizens for Manchester Schools, which is a group advocating for, the proper support of public education in the city. But I would, the first place, and I don't usually go here because I don't want to be talking about me. I'd say one thing first, which is that in any given week, if I were just coming on here to talk for an hour, I'd be just another chattering head and kind of talking at the thing. But I like to take action to actually see things done. So I'm involved in multiple organizations, etc. I just recently resigned after many years on the Manchester North Soccer League. I was president of the soccer league up until June of this year, where we have 600 or 700 kids. I'm involved running the British are Coming soccer camp at Hillside Middle School. We raised.
Do you think? I hate to interrupt you. Do you think the soccer camp has helped this agenda?
The agenda of what's happening in the schools in the city?
Oh, well, you're talking about the public schools. Yeah, I mean, I've watched for 3 weeks or so.
Yeah, what we have done is we have kids in the city who can't afford to play organized sports, and so we've brought them in on a pro bono basis and helped them to, giving them, we don't have to think, they're not actually scholarships like that it's written down somewhere, but we make sure that kids who are in need are allowed to take part in those programs. And then in places like, let me go to Hillside Middle School, as the president of PTO there, we went from having an annual budget of around $1,000 or something to an annual budget of around about $35,000 a year or $30,000 a year, where we put lots of technology into that school. We bought, we redecorated the school, organized parents to repaint all the gyms and the hallways, etc. We bought books for the school. We did improvements to the grounds around the school. Just lots of different activities over time.
That all seems very admirable.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound like a jerk, right? But
right.
I mean, what you rail against is at the school board is a completely different issue than what you're talking about with the soccer league. So
yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, what my main question is, and I think we've both got a little off topic, and I appreciate everything that you've done. It takes a lot of time and energy to have those accomplishments, right? I mean, right. I certainly haven't done anything that impressive. But what I'm asking is, what take out the soccer league, take out the president organizations. What kind of things have you done on the inside, or have you affected change on the inside, or made someone on the inside affect change by some of the things you've done?
Well,
that's what I'm curious about.
Right.
I'm going to watches your show.
Okay, so for instance, like on the school board, on the board of mayor and alderman, I regularly contact members of the school board and members of the board, mayor and alderman. I was just talking as you called in about Joe Kelly Levasseur, right? So Joe, I called Joe, I talked to him, regularly, and we wouldn't see eye to eye always politically, but I call him up and I say to him, hey, you're misinformed on this topic. I mean, I'll make a phone call to other school board members, and most of them, not all of them, but most of them are amenable to receiving the phone call, and I like to think, and not being big-headed, but I like to think that because I don't call them every day and annoy them about it, but I like to think that they understand when I make a call that I'm making a call for genuine reasons and I'm pointing something out to them that they don't know. So, for instance, let me take a most recent example. Running into school this year, 3 weeks before school, I went in and found out what the school class sizes were in some of the schools to find out where we were. And when the numbers were higher than they should be, I called a number of school board members on the back end privately. I sent an email. I visited the mayor. I sent an email to the mayor, and I said, because I didn't want to be accused of gotcha politics when school opened on the 5th of September, sort of jumping out from behind the bushes going, guess what? The classes are too big. But I made the point, that there's a problem burgeoning here and it needs to be sorted out. There was a school on another issue, a school with, where there was dirt and garbage in the parking lot that hadn't been cleaned up the first day of school, and I made it. This is not acceptable. It shouldn't be happening. Let's get something done about it. So,
all right, I don't think I guess I'm not. Won't get the answer to the question, but I appreciate your show, and I'm going to hang up. But I enjoy watching it, and I look forward to seeing what you have to say about things. Okay.
All right.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye. Yeah, I'm sorry, Connor, if I was missing the point, and maybe when I look at this later, and I'm being, as somebody said in the movie Shawshank Redemption. If you remember, the guy says to the governor at one point, he says, why are you being so obtuse? And that's when he gets locked up for a number of days and all the rest of it. But so maybe I was being obtuse, and I apologize. But I'm trying to address your question. I think around the, I have to say this, I try not to be I don't want to be like the two old guys in the Muppet Show, sort of, pointing out faults from up on the side and not actually trying to make change. So I'm very conscious of that. Generally speaking, in the city of Manchester, once people are in public office, it's amazing to me that it's in their own interest to only talk about the positive thing, whatever positive things that have happened. And there are lots of positive things, and we could talk about them, and I do talk about them, and I try to congratulate kids and when they do important things and when schools achieve things. But there are too many people who are not in the. I don't know what happened to our background right there. Disappeared for a minute. But anyway, there are too many people who want to talk about whatever the latest shiny object over here is, and they don't want to talk to you about what the reality is. And the reality is we have kids, like we find out in the newspaper article this week about kids not having math books in their schools. Let me ask, Kirsten, I think we lost our background there, so.
Technical difficulties, just a minute.
Are we all right? Good. So I'll just keep. Are we still on? All right, good. So, just in the studio here, the screens all went dark, so it wasn't playing what was happening. But there are real issues in our schools, and many people just don't want to talk about them because they want to. I suppose cover up is too strong a word, but they don't want you all to know about the truth because they'd have to actually take some action against it. So last year in Central High School, two of my kids in math classes, one is a freshman and one is a junior. One had 30 kids in their class, and the other had 32. So I know one of my daughter, one of her classes as a senior this year has got 30 kids in it. I haven't asked about the others. My son, who's a sophomore at Central High School, he hasn't got Latin this year. So he's in his second year of high school, and he has to do VLAX. He has to take online Latin because the Latin teacher is only there half day a week at Central and half day a week at Memorial. So we have one Latin teacher driving back and forth across the city, which would be fine. But I'm just one person, one experience. So I know one of my daughter, one of her classes as a senior this year has got 30 kids in it. I haven't asked about the others. My son, who's a sophomore at Central High School, he hasn't got Latin this year. So he's in his second year of high school, and he has to do VLAX. He has to take online Latin because the Latin teacher is only there half day a week at Central and half day a week at Memorial. So we have one Latin teacher driving back and forth across the city, which would be fine, but as one person, one experience, and I'm 17, 18. He's in his sophomore year. Most, if not all, universities today require you to have a minimum of 3 years of foreign languages in your secondary school, in your high school. Most require 4 years, and my son is going to have to go after hours and at night and online without an actual physical teacher to do Latin online because Manchester School District can't afford to pay a teacher to teach him. And I'm just talking about one guy, one class. I might be the most unlucky parent in the city, and he might be the only one, and everybody else is doing fine. Of course, we know that that's not the case, right? And as part of what the gentleman who called in earlier on was talking about, what can you affect? One of the things that I was at this summer was talking about, schools being closed to local residents. The people were coming in to a district and they were being told by the front office in schools that, sorry, this school we're maxed out, our 7th grades are all full, you have to go to someplace else. And I made it plain to people within the school board that was an unacceptable response from people within the city. That I was advocating, and I will continue to do this. I was advocating for them to actually take ownership of it. So if a kid arrives here from Ohio and lives in let's say McLaughlin Middle School area, and they apply to go to McLaughlin Middle School, I don't think it's acceptable for McLaughlin to say, sorry, we're full, go someplace else. I think what should happen is that when the person arrives here from Ohio with their kid, applies to go to McLaughlin is full, then McLaughlin should say, come in and visit with us on whatever day you can come in. We look after your kid. Sadly, he may have to end up going to a different school, but we've got your back. We'll look after it. We'll have him put in a program in one of our 3 other middle schools. This idea, this bureaucratic response of, you're all done, sorry, we're full, we'll just go someplace else, is just not acceptable. And that doesn't mean they were bad people. It's just that that's the way that it was coming across. And also, one of the things I left out when responding to the caller was that I also speak regularly with the superintendent. We have a quarterly meeting. We talk with the superintendent. As I said at the start of this meeting, about his coffee mornings, etc. I try to do the same thing every week. I try to do something practical that affects kids' lives in the city of Manchester, so that I'm doing something other than just talking about it. That I've taken some action during that week that has helped some group of kids somewhere in the city. I try to live by that 52 weeks of the year. And at the same time, I do this to highlight the places where some people don't choose to highlight because they're difficult topics, or they don't want to really talk about the truth of what's going on. Ladies and gentlemen, starting after this week, we're coming to the end of this program, but starting after the end of this week, we're going to have guests on here every week up to the election. So many of the wards are represented. Any public representatives in the area who are running for office who would like to come on this show over the next 6 weeks or at any time, please contact me, and I'd be happy to have them on. Again, thank you very much for being part of our show. Sorry about the little glitch earlier on. See you all in a week. Bye-bye now.